Now, let me begin to slide into the topic at hand. My own history involves being in and out of zoo research for 30 years, but I spent the last 12 years quite intensely involved in marine mammal research. And marine mammals have the same issues that all zoo animals have, but in a way a bit more intense and a bit more crystallized and focused because they are among the most challenging animals to keep in captivity. But they have very difficult and very challenging husbandry issues, very important challenges regarding enrichment and animal welfare. They really bring to the light the question of whether animals in zoos should be trained, the role of training, and even the question and role of the place, if there is one, for animal shows, and like the ones depicted here. And they also are the recipient of a sort of unprecedented level of public affection and simultaneously public scrutiny. We have in the marine mammal world, as in the zoo world more widely, questions about whether or not their welfare is adequately served. Now, these are the same species, same issues as for other species, but they crystallize particularly prominently for marine mammals. Now, let me segue to terrestrial zoos, and I hope people may be able to recognize these pictures. This is a San Diego Wild Animal Park. If you have not yet seen it, you should. It is an area where the zoo community has simply put a fence around a rather large valley divided into fairly substantial paddocks and allow animals to more or less interact freely in rather naturalistic conditions. And if you have not yet been to the wilds in southeastern Ohio, it is also worth visiting. It's a site of a former strip mine, but now the land has been reclaimed, and in even larger paddocks, fairly substantial numbers of animals. You see where my mouse is going here. This is a herd of ibex, and it's sort of like a safari experience. You load on these buses and drive through these paddocks. And I had the experience of going to the wilds. Only a few days later, I went to this place. It's Custer State Park in South Dakota, and took these photos. And it seemed even more wild than the wilds, but they also are animals held in paddocks. You drive through a paddock and one bison herd, and then you drive through another herd of a different species. And the similarity was very striking, and so it really brings out questions like, is this the future of zoos, or is this the process? It certainly is a trend in zoos to provide animals with larger and larger enclosures, and if that is the future, a zoo is going to ultimately merge into parks as the human population grows and fences start forming around parks, and zoos grow larger, and of course they have fences. Are we ultimately going to have a blurring of the distinction? And the answer, of course, is yes, but only sort of yes, and not for all species. How would a situation like this play out for marine mammals? There isn't a clear movement in that direction, say, with the animals with which I'm currently affiliated. And also, it begs the question of what is going on with marine mammals, or what is going on, what should be or what will be going on in marine mammals and other species like marine mammals that have similar challenges. And so that is the context in which we will be having this discussion over the next 2 days. Now, let me say, for some, the future of zoos evokes the question of whether or not there will be zoos. And in fact, concerns about animal rights lead some to ask whether or not it's appropriate for there to be zoos, whether or not it's appropriate for there to be animal captivity really of any sort. And those conversations are very interesting, and those conversations would be worthwhile and could occupy us for the next 2 days. But that is not the agenda for this meeting. At this meeting, the assumption is that there will be zoos, and we will proceed with that. We'll proceed on that ground. So why? Well, there have been zoos for centuries, and the zoos are phenomenally popular. They have attendance records that exceed nearly all other venues, all cultural venues, venues period. there are zoos being built all over, new zoos being developed all over the developing world, and also modern, the existing zoos in the developed world are being constantly renovated and improved with buildings and other structures that have 100-year lifespans. And so all signs indicate that there will be zoos. And so we're going to have our conversation on the assumption that there will be, and that is the basis of this meeting. Now, so people have asked, we're talking about the future, which future? So I have two choices for you. One future is this one. I don't know how many of you recognize the scene. It is Blade Runner. So it's from the film Blade Runner, and it depicts an extremely crowded world with people living in the bottoms of cities and, you know, crowded and rather oppressive conditions. And that is, in fact, the view that some futurists have. I'm a little bit more optimistic, and so I'll give you this alternative view and show you this Jetsons whizzing around in air cars, and they're all happy. And I call this the Star Trek vision. You know, Gene Roddenberry's view of Star Trek is the world is peace and harmony, and virtually all problems have solved except the ones from outer space. We can pick either one, but there is the question, what timescale to pursue. I asked originally that the timescale be 100 years, to think 100 years into the future, and actually had quite a bit of pushback, not just from people in general that I've spoken to, but from some of the panelists, that 100 years is just too ambitious to think so far, and maybe 20 would be easier. My own view is 20 is too easy, and 20 is not only too easy because it's almost certain that the zoos 20 years from now will look and be very similar, almost identical to what they are now. And furthermore, 20 years is too short a time scale over which to affect real visionary change. At least that's my opinion. The large institutions like zoos and others, like large ships, they change course slowly, or at least they characteristically do. But if we take a truly 100-year time scale, and we set ourselves goals that are reasonable, agreed upon, and achievable, then we could, in fact, steer our path towards those goals and possibly achieve them. So we've challenged the audience, the panelists, to think in terms of 50 and 100 years. Now, let me keep track of where I am. So I mentioned zoo directors because among the people I admire most on this, in this world are zoo directors. They have among the most interesting jobs, and they have among the most challenging jobs. They have to wear many hats, and at least one of them is a hat I love dearly. It's the hat of a deep thinker. It almost reminds me of academics they're scientists who think about how best to display the biological lessons. They think about conservation questions in their how to convey the lessons, the conservation lessons they're trying to achieve, and how to actually achieve true conservation. They try to do this, and when I speak with them privately, they almost always are quite visionary and have very creative ideas and proscriptions for the future. But zoo directors are also simultaneously, by obligation, politicians to a degree. They are public figures that have to always worry about the reactions in the press. They have to worry about the next funding cycle. They have to worry about whether they are or are not meeting their payrolls, and whether or not their next project is going to be successful as a public venture. They have to vie with other public ventures for attention and for resources. And it happens naturally that the second role sometimes inhibits the first role. And so one of the goals here, and one of my experience, even in the marine mammal world, is that when I'm talking to people in the marine mammal world about change for next year, it's a very reactionary, often tight-lipped response. But if you ask those people about what will the marine mammal scene look like 100 years from now, they're actually quite willing to talk about it and actually have very thoughtful and positive, creative ideas about what will exist 100 years from now. The truth is, all of us here up at the front of the room will be gone 100 years from now. And I know initially that makes us all sad, but that is also liberating in a way. We will, we will be able to talk about things that won't directly affect us. We'll talk about the zoos for our grandchildren. And when we're interested in talking about establishing a legacy for our grandchildren, it's in fact liberating and inspiring. At least I hope it is. I'm a true believer in an arc of progress. At least in my own world, the air is cleaner now than it was, cleaner here in this area than it was when I was young. And there's more people living in prosperity than when I was young. And despite all the troubles in the world, there are better conditions in many ways than when I was young, and certainly better than 200 or 500 years ago. So I'm an optimist, and I'll stay that way for the rest of my days. And I dearly loved and remembered my own grandmother. My grandmother would talk to me about how she would care for old-timers when she was a young adult. She would care for the old-timers, and especially the veterans. And I came to realize when I was a young adult, she lived to be 90, I overlapped with her by 40 years, she was talking about veterans of the Civil War. She would take care of veterans of the Civil War, and she would be able to tell me about that. She went on to she told me about her memories of when the survivors of the Titanic landed in New York City. She remembers the Wright brothers. She remembers people landing on the moon. In a single lifetime, her memory and the memories that she passed on to me spanned more than 100 years. We will have grandchildren. All of us will have grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And they will inhabit this same planet. Well, some people are shaking their heads. Metaphorically, you'll have grandchildren. You are to think about my grandchildren. And they will inhabit this same planet. They will live in cities, and they'll live in suburbs. They'll live in rural areas. They'll have knowledge, some of which is, they'll live in a world that will be different, but they'll have expectations, and they'll have challenges that they'll face. But I believe that we can anticipate these things. We can and we should anticipate these things. It's a matter of being reactionary or proactive in terms of how we steer towards the future. And I think we should be proactive. And so it's an interesting thought experiment. It's one that it's a mental exercise I've given to the panel as a challenge, and I'll challenge everybody in the room with the same question. Imagine that you have the task to design a zoo from scratch. You don't have to live with existing buildings or existing limitations. Design a zoo from scratch. Now, in your minds, do this. And you can build it and design it in any way you wish. And you're to insert it into a city or a human community. But you're to pack it now, and it's going to be unpacked 100 years from now, in a world that we're going to try to anticipate. And it is probably more crowded, 10 billion people. You tell me, is it going to be 9 billion, 10 billion, or 12 billion people? But it's going to be more. And it's going to be technologically far advanced, the speed with which technology is progressing. It's obvious to all of us. Technology will be more advanced. And other things will be true. We're going to spend the next 2 days trying to anticipate that, and the next 2 days not only talking about what is probably going to happen, but I hope also what should happen. And so in your minds, help us, and panelists, I hope you take this challenge, and let's talk about designing a zoo for the future, or steering the course towards that future.